guys for letting me be a part of this congregation. The last 6 years of my life, I've seen a lot of growth in me personally, and things that God has done in my life because of being with all of you. And I have you guys to thank for that, being my family, my community, being there for me. It's been an amazing journey. It's not really going to be a sermon this morning, though it says that up there. This is going to be more about my spiritual journey, where God has taken me from the time I was very, very young to getting to where I am today, and being a part of this fellowship, being a part of GCI. So it's quite a journey. I'm trying to cover the highlights here, and hoping I can shed some light on some things, answer some questions. I know a bunch of you are aware that I didn't grow up as a part of Worldwide Church of God, or GCI. And so as a lot of you in this room took that journey, I thought it would be a good idea to kind of share my own background. First of all, I wasn't always, this may surprise you, but I wasn't always the spiritual giant that you see before you this morning. So right there, it's very appropriate to snicker or give me a bad time during any of this. So that's totally appropriate. Just starting out as a little tyke, some of my earliest memories were being in a church congregation. I remember having I'm old enough to remember the flannel graph that would be up on the wall, and you'd have Daniel and the lion's dens, and they put those up there, and Jonah in the belly of the whale, and all the Old Testament stories. So I remember, those are some of my earliest memories. I was raised in the Disciples of Christ denomination, or Christian church as it's known to some, similar to Church of Christ, if you're familiar with that mainline denomination. My grandfather was a very influential pastor in that denomination. He was one of the very earliest graduates of what we know now as Northwest Christian College, or Northwest Christian University here in town. In fact, there is a scholarship in his name that they do every year, a Bible reading scholarship that's handed out in his name. So some of my earliest memories were, again, going to church. Even with my grandfather's background, my parents, I wouldn't say were devout Christians. My father was an agnostic. Outside of the church building, that's about as far as religion went in our lives. It stopped on the way out the door, and there wasn't a whole lot of emphasis about Christianity at home. And although I attended Sunday school, I didn't really have a firm grasp on the gospel message itself. Didn't understand its relevance to me, didn't understand its relevance for anything, really, other than this is our religious duty, this is what we do, we go to church, that's just a separate part of our lives. In fact, I can remember my older brother, who I think a lot of you might be familiar with. He's played drums for us a few times now. But I remember during sermons where I must have been like 10, 12 years old, and we'd sit and we'd talk during the sermon, and we'd get backhanded by my dad or mom, whoever was sitting nearest, and but we would say to each other, "Man, isn't it going to be great? I mean, one day we're going to be old enough to where we're going to never have to go to church ever again. Isn't that going to be awesome?" And we would just sit there and imagine, what's that going to be like? Never having to get up. And we learned, kind of at an early age too, that if we were quiet enough on a Sunday morning, that we had the chance that we wouldn't wake our parents up in time to go to church. So this began to be a goal for us, was, okay, so Bob, my younger brother, okay, just settle down, don't make any noise. And so, as kids are, there's 3 boys in the house, things get thrown around, things get broken, and all of a sudden the door would open up to my parents' room. Boys, get ready for church. Oh, man, that's your fault. You did this. No, you did that. And pushing and shoving and all that ensues. But it's funny how both my older brother and I, although we had just imagined what it would be like never, ever to go to church ever again. And God has a funny sense of humor, as you're probably aware, that both of us have been heavily involved in church life as adults. In my early teen years, there was something that started brewing within me. There was difficult times with my parents, and sometimes I go running out of the house, and usually with a couple of my dad's cigarettes. I would find some secluded place down the street. At the end of the street was a forest where I grew up. And so I'd sit there on a log or something, and I didn't really know who to talk to when times were tough and when I wasn't getting along with my parents and life wasn't really making sense. I'd start talking to God. I mean, from earliest childhood memories, I always believed that somebody was there. I didn't know who, I didn't know what, I didn't know what they had to do with me, if anything. But I tried. And I would voice out and I would vent out what was going on in my life to whoever was up there, whoever might possibly be listening. Now, during this time, I also began to read a chapter of the Bible every night before going to bed. I thought, okay, well, we go to church, and he's reading from the Bible up there at front every Sunday. The pastor is preaching these messages. Maybe I should read my Bible. I had very little understanding, but something was starting to take hold. Something was drawing me. I remember getting inspired by sermons, and afterwards I thought, I'm just going to be so nice today. This one day of the week, I'm going to give it everything I can, and I'm going to be nice and respectful for my parents. And I thought about, who's the one person who I'm the worst to? It had to be my younger brother, Bob. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to concentrate on being nice to Bob today, just this Sunday. And we would make it out the church doors. We would get into the car, and I'm trying to be nice and speak to him kindly. And even before we got home, I ended up pushing him, or as we're getting out of the car, tripping him. And then I'm like, well, it's useless. I can't do this. I can't be holy. So just give up. Just don't do anything. So that was kind of my early teen years. And then all that time, something is going on. Something is stirring within me. Something is starting to click. I just didn't know what. When I was 16, I was invited to a different church that my best friend was attending at the time. In fact, he talked about a youth group that he went to. Now, my church growing up did not have a youth group. I had no idea, what is a youth group? What are you guys doing? What is that about? Well, we play pool. There's a ping pong table. We listen to music. We watch videos. We play games. There's lots of girls there. Told my friend, well, you could have just started with there's girls there, and I'm in. So we went, and the first midweek Wednesday night youth group meeting, we were having so much fun, and then we all got settled down and we got seated, and then I started hearing the youth leaders and the youth pastor talk about things that I had no knowledge of, even though I grew up in the church. And 16 years of flannel graph images, they started talking about salvation. They started using terms like being born again, terms like a relationship with Jesus. And I thought this was crazy. I'm like, what? I've been in church my whole life. What are you guys talking about? What does this stuff mean? I just had no knowledge. And as it began to be explained to me, I still I couldn't wrap my head around what was being shared. But what I did know and what I did recognize, that for the first time in my life up until that point, I had never felt such love and acceptance by a group of people. The youth workers were probably in their early 30s, youth pastor, late 30s. And so I didn't really have a lot of influence up until that point by any adults in my life. My parents and I were not close, and they just received me every single week. They were excited to see me. I can't really say that I remember much of what was shared other than the love that I was starting to receive. And I wanted that each and every week. I couldn't wait to get to youth group and to be accepted and to be loved. And all of a sudden, those words, those terms that they shared started to make sense. So on a Wednesday night at a youth group meeting, I said what many of you might recognize as the sinner's prayer. And so they led me through a prayer of saying, Jesus, forgive me of my sins. Come into my life. Let your Holy Spirit be in me and move through me. And some other things thrown in. But all I can say is that next morning, I woke up and I did feel like I was a brand new person. Like everything had changed. The lights had come on. Whatever weight and pressure had been on me, I felt loved by God. I felt that there was something real that was now established. All those questions in my early teen years and all my efforts of trying to get somewhere, I felt like this is it. And at that point, I was very enthusiastic about this newfound faith, this newfound relationship with God. So what did I do? I mean, this was the most exciting thing that's ever happened to me in my life. I wanted to share it with everybody. And so I did. And there weren't a lot of happy people about it. Those that I went to church with were fine. But friends that I had partied with and did a lot of vandalism with and just stupid things that happened, it really turned them off, and they didn't want to be around me any longer. You know, this guy's a Jesus freak. You know, all he talks about is Jesus. Jesus saved me. Jesus did that. Jesus did this. And my own family, who I grew up going to church with, my grandmother, in fact, started persecuting me. And it was because I was no longer a part of their fellowship or their church. And so there was a lot of issues in my family with this. They didn't like me being this crazy, zealous, religious Jesus freak that they now had on their hands to deal with. Before, it wasn't such an issue when I was doing all these rebellious, crazy things, but now that I was saved, if you will, it was causing a lot of problems for people. And I all of a sudden, the Bible began to make sense to me, and I was constantly reading my Bible. I remember my family went on a cruise shortly after my conversion experience. Most of the time on the cruise, as a 16-year-old, I'm in my cabin reading my Bible. My family hated it. This guy thinks he's better than us. I was just excited. I was just exuberant. I just was overwhelmed that I had this love and that I had this thing in my life that had never experienced. About a year later, I had some friends that I formerly hung out with that disowned me because of my religious beliefs. More about me probably trying to shove it down their throat than anything else. They called me up one night and they said, hey, we were out somewhere on the downtown mall and we ran into some people that started talking to us about God. And they even handed us a tract. And you know what? They sounded as crazy as you were. And so we thought, maybe you got something in common with these people. And so we have this religious advertisement or something, this religious tract, and it's got their phone number. Here, you should call them. Okay. And so this began, to me, the road to legalism. When I was introduced to these people, I found out that they only lived a block from where I was. I could walk to their house in 5 minutes. And so we started swapping stories about Jesus and their religious experience. But they began to tell me, David, you're young in the faith. You're new. This is all new to you. So we're going to explain some things here, right? We've been at this a lot longer. Sure. Yeah, I'm hungry for anything. I want to know whatever anybody can tell me about God that I don't know. I'm just so hungry. Just feed me. Get it out there. I said, well, there's a lot that you really need to do for God if you want Him to accept you. Oh, really? Well, yeah, you need to read your Bible an hour a day. In fact, every morning when you get up in the morning before you go to school, you need to pray. You need to pray hard for people and intercede. And, okay, yeah, I can do that. And then you need to go witnessing with us. We'll take you downtown. We'll take you to Willamette Street. Anybody remember the Gut? The Gut. You'd go in a big circle every Friday night or Saturday night. And so we began to, I began to go witnessing with them. As I started hanging out with them, it isolated me further from the people that really helped me in my conversion experience. And they convinced me that those people were wrong, that they didn't have the whole truth, that there was a lot more for you to discover by adhering to these strict rules and things that your life needed now to be built upon. These people, yeah, okay, they love you and all that, but they don't understand. So you need to come with us now. You need to go to our church. And this is also where I started being taught about Pentecostal teachings. And they insisted that if you were a true believer in Christ, you needed to speak in tongues. And you needed to prophesy over people and tell them things about their lives. So that there was a lot more things that I think because of my initial exuberance, it wasn't hard to add those things in there. But pretty soon, that became the focal point for me. How much was I praying? How much was I reading my Bible? How much was I witnessing to people? How well was I giving up sinful things in my life? All the things that focused on me, me, me. I remember these same people telling me when I showed up at their doorstep wearing a shirt that said Adidas on it. They said, no. You can't wear that shirt. Why? What's wrong with Adidas? Well, they, people seeing that could say it's an acronym for All Day I Dream About Sex. Okay? So I ripped up my shirt and threw that away. I'm not sure what Nike stands for, but I'm sure it is, But they also convinced me to get rid of my rock and roll collection. And so here I was, and part of me was still not quite as redeemed as I could have been, but so I get on top of my parents' second-story house, and I take the records, LPs out of their sleeves and start hucking them through the neighborhood, and shattered my extensive rock and roll collection. It still brings a tear to my eye. So this is where I was going. And with this kind of environment, I began to get really, really prideful. Because I had now developed a way of looking at people and judging people and saying, I don't think she prays as much as I do. I know he doesn't read as much of the Bible. I know I'm giving more than her. I'm doing this. I know that person's not even witnessing, and I got them blown away. I really felt at that time, at 16, 17 years of age, that I was the best Christian there had ever been. I mean, nobody was topping me. I was it. I had reached the pinnacle of a Christian life. I don't know, some of you may have experienced this, but when you start to get that far off track and that prideful, you can only do this for so far when you start running out of your own steam and started feeling like I couldn't do this very well. Something was going wrong. What happened to the initial joy? What happened to the peace that I had? And now it was just filled with me yelling at sinners on the street or shoving the gospel down people's throats or judging them. I began to lose a lot of ground, and I had a lot of fear of God at that point. I felt like at any moment God could send me to hell and I would burn for eternity, and this was part of the teachings that I had. So my senior year of high school, I moved in with my dad right after my parents divorced. As fate would have it, I ended up living between drug dealers on one side and drug consumers on the other. They were close to my age. They were just out of high school, and I knew some of them. I played soccer with them before. And I started experimenting with anything short of heroin, but everything up until that point, you name it, I probably tried it at that point for that year. And all this time, I'm hiding from God. I'm like wanting nothing to do with God. I couldn't do it. And whenever I was at school and I would see any of my Christian friends, I would just go around the corner just to try to get away from them. What I was also finding, though, is these people that I hung out with now, on both sides of me, accepted me for who I was. They didn't have any expectations. They didn't have any demands. They just said, hey, just come on over and get high. That was it. There was something attractive about them. So about a year after this, I had a couple really horrible drug-related experience that finally sobered me up. And I thought, what do I do now? I just graduated from high school. I know, I need to get back into religion. I need to get back into an environment where I can be safe and I can redouble my efforts. That's what I'm going to do. I applied for Youth with a Mission. It's a parachurch organization all over the world. Every single location, though, has its own unique flavor, its own brand. This one was being held in Tacoma, Washington at the time, and it gave me a good avenue to stay off drugs and to double down on the religious experience. Much of the focus during this time, it was a 6-month school, and we were focused on hearing from God. What is God speaking to you? And ridding ourselves of sinful habits, of renewing our mind and sharing our faith. I think unfortunately what was happening was it was still very much focused on me. It was still very much focused on how much am I going to do? How much am I going to put into my religious experience? After 3 months was up, we spent the next 3 months in my first time in the Philippines on an outreach. It was here that I really started to feel like something was leading me towards ministry. Something was leading me towards overseas missions. So as I got home, actually went back to Tacoma, Washington. The whole year that I'm there, all I could do was think about being back in the Philippines, think about ministering. At that time, I was going to I don't know how you guys would call this, but it was kind of a name it and claim it hyper-faith church. Are you guys familiar? Basically, it was a situation where If I wanted and I saw a Mercedes going down the road, really nice car, well, I claim that Mercedes in the name of Jesus for my life. Hallelujah. You know, so a lot of it was, a lot of this was some pretty crazy stuff. Got into that for about a year and decided, you know, I'm ready to go to the Philippines. I'm ready to go. I applied. They went ahead and accepted me. And so I served for 2 years in a place called Baguio City up in the mountains. Loved it. This confirmed to me that I just had the best time of my life. I was challenged. I was pushed. I was doing jail ministry and teaching Bible studies there twice a week, leading worship. I was working with a local church doing youth ministry. I was playing in a band, doing concerts, crusades, things like that. I was given a lot of opportunities to preach at different churches. And it really opened my eyes to the wider body of Christ, that there's a lot out there. There were people from dozens of different countries that were there, dozens of different backgrounds. You had Pentecostals and Charismatics and Baptists and Catholics. You had everything going on. It was an exciting time for me. It was a confirming time that this was something that my life was heading into. And I knew that I needed more knowledge. I needed more Bible background than what I currently had. So after that 2 years was up, I decided to attend an Assemblies of God Bible College up in Kirkland, Washington, Northwest University up there. This is where I would eventually meet and marry my ex-wife. And it again was a great time. I was looking forward to doing ministry. But as the years went on, and I spent 5 years in classes, the longer I sat there, the less I wanted to go overseas and do anything. Oh, and then to have the missions professor drop a bomb on me and say, well, with your kind of school loan debt, no mission agency is going to send you anywhere. So you're pretty well stuck in the U.S. for, the next 30 years or whatever. Yeah. So at this point, I began to be a little deflated about things. I was still involved very much in a local church there, again, with worship, with youth ministry, home groups. But at this point, my heart just wasn't in it. I felt like I was really just going through the motions. I didn't feel like I was living an overtly sinful, rebellious life or anything like that. I just kind of settled in. I just didn't have it. I didn't have the zeal any longer. I didn't have the heart to do this. But I felt like my only choice was to fake it. My only choice was just keep moving. Just keep moving. Although my heart was just done. After our college years, moved back to Eugene here. At that point, we started looking for a church what we thought would be exciting. A church that would have a lot of opportunities. A church that was really doing things. So the church we became a part of was very affluent, charismatic, but again, kind of gravitated towards the legalistic side of things. Very shortly after arriving, it became clear to us that there were a lot of expectations of how much money to give. And there were several times a year special offerings, first fruits, and different pledges, and that's all above your tithes and offerings and missionary offerings and things like that. Expectations of being in a home group, of leading your own home group. Expectations of being there every time the doors were open. Most of the messages, guilt-ridden and pointed at those who weren't doing their part. Well, fortunately for my ex and I, we were doing our part. We got on the fast track. We volunteered for everything. We showed up when we were supposed to be there. We gave crazy amounts of money. we responded to those messages. We began to be noticed by the leadership of the church, and were kind of put on a pedestal, as it were. So we were doing a lot, very involved, getting a lot of pats on the back. But again, something was happening, and it was like a cancer. It was like, I am completely and utterly miserable. I can't do this. At that same time is when the breakdown occurred. I had a job that I lost. Because of that, I fell into a deep depression. I think partly because of that, partly because of where I was at spiritually. I couldn't do anything. I didn't want to do anything. And this went on for quite some time, for about 9 months of just this misery. Finally, one day, middle of the week, middle of the day, I'm in my bathrobe, sitting down in the living room, and I'm cursing God, and I'm screaming at the top of my lungs just how upset with God I was. Upset with how He let me down. All the promises that I was given, if I just did these things, if I gave this much money, if I came to these services, if I listened and watched these teachings, if I did this, if I did that, if I was involved in youth, if I was involved in evangelism, if I gave all this money, I couldn't help but be blessed, right? All of these things were supposed to fall into place for my life. That was supposed to take care of everything, wasn't it? And here I was, jobless, depressed, miserable. I reminded God of everything I had done for Him to build His kingdom. I went to Bible college. I went overseas. I preached to tons of people. I prayed the sinner's prayer. I've gotten people saved. I've done this. I've given all this money. And all I ask for you to do is come and rescue me out of this misery and change my life in some way. This is all wrong. I've done everything for you. You've repaid nothing. I'm done. I am finished. Tears just streaming. I sat there with my back against the wall in my living room. I was numb because I knew it was over. I wasn't taking another step. Some of you may have experienced something similar where you reach the end of your own resources, the end of figuring it all out, when you have nothing more to figure out, when it's just over. A still small voice comes through the crack in your soul, like it did to me. And basically, the words that I heard were, when did you think? When did you start to think that you needed to do any of this for my favor? When did you think I required any of this to be done, to get my love, to get my acceptance? How did you get so far removed from the truth? How? Who told you that you needed to do these things in order to get anything from me? You've always had everything. You've had my love. You've had my acceptance. Nothing further was required for that. So now my mind is blown. What do? I start laughing. As hard as I had previously been crying, I am now, moments later, laughing uncontrollably at the futility of the last 15 or so years of my life of slaving away like the older brother in the prodigal son story, needed to slave away for God when it was never required. I thought, how stupid have I been? How did I get so far off track? And I started remembering what it was like when I first had my conversion experience. That it had nothing to do when I was 16 years old. That it had nothing to do with what I would promise to do for God. That it had nothing to do with any of the regulations, the self-imposed rules by others or myself. That I was under complete grace. And now, I needed to get back to that. So this is the part where I started reconstructing my faith. I could find every book that I possibly could get my hands on to find out about God's love, God's grace. What was the truth? What is the gospel? So I began to grow in that. As you can probably imagine, that put me at odds with the kind of church I was a part of. The kind of church that would tell people who you could marry, who you couldn't. Who could kick you off ministries for not paying enough money into the church. They didn't welcome my grace message. And so I found someplace else to go. Was involved in a lot of, again, worship ministry, youth ministry. It's at this point that I started, some of you might be familiar with Steve McVeigh. Steve has been very popular in the grace-oriented movement for quite some time. And I actually at one point wanted to be part of his ministry and wanted to do some work with him. I actually met up with him in Mexico and was thinking about joining Grace Walk Ministries. I mean, here I was really growing in the freedom that I was experiencing Christ. I could breathe again. I could do things not out of my own strength, but out of Christ's. And I could be accepted. Shortly after I got to know Steve started having a bit of a paradigm shift, which turned off about half of his supporters, a lot of whom I was good friends with, either through Facebook or in person. And it really threw me for a loop. I was caught in the middle. I liked Steve. I loved Steve. I revered Steve. But I thought, what is he doing? What is he talking about? And I wrestled with it. I started wrestling with the whole idea that we have here. That Christ has done all the necessary reconciling work for mankind. That it is a done deal. That there's not a transaction on our part that we must make in order for that reconciliation. It's been done. I couldn't, for a while, I couldn't get it. I couldn't get that we were included. Up until this point, the belief had been that God was separate from humanity, separate from humans, couldn't hear your prayers because of sin, would not even listen to you, had nothing to do with you. You were corrupt, and therefore you needed to say a certain prayer. That you needed to transact something on your part to get God to reconcile, to get God to forgive you, to get God to even listen to you. So this took me about a year to let it sink in. And like anything else, sometimes it takes a little time. But as you pray and as you ask God for help on this, I began to see the beauty of this. I began to see the truth of this. And to read others that were affirming the same thing. And once again, the vision I now was embracing was a much, much greater God, was a much more loving God, a much more inclusive God, that the character and nature of God towards humanity was just something that I had never been able to see like I was beginning to. It was also about that time that I met this gal online, and she lived in Albany, and decided to go up there. We went out a few times, and I can remember one of the times we met, she asked me, she goes, well, if you had to pick a certain profession, if you had to, think of your perfect career, what would it be? What would that look like to you? Well, if I could choose anything I wanted to do, I would like it to be something that I really believe in. Maybe even involves my spiritual beliefs in some way. I'd like to be involved in music. I like to speak publicly in front of people. I like a high degree of autonomy. I like to work in the public. I like to have my own workspace. But I don't want to do the same tasks every single day, day in and day out, and be tethered to the phones, where, as most of you know, I was tethered to the phones for the last 4 years. That was great. That was not in my perfect career plan. And as I'm mentioning all these things, where I have time to study and do research and make a difference in people's lives and help people and all those other things I mentioned, she's just getting this big grin on her face. And as I stopped, I'm like, what are you smiling about? What is it? She goes, you just described being a pastor. I'm like, oh, no, you're kidding me. Yeah, don't say that. Don't say that. But I couldn't help what she said. I started looking into it a bit further. And I couldn't deny it. I was starting to develop this hunger. I started to see it and say, maybe this is where it's all going. Maybe through everything that I've been through, this journey that I've been on, that this is something that God is bringing me towards. And so, as I was coming back from Arizona, I went on Steve McVeigh's website, and one day he says, so you guys out there might want to look into Grace Communion International. I'd never heard of Grace Communion International. He said, but if you like what I'm saying now and what I'm teaching, that'd be great if you could find a local congregation. So I popped in the zip code and I found it. And I still remember my first day walking in at the Methodist church over there and just kind of looking around, kind of taking the temperature of the room. I'd been in a lot of different church services, a lot of denominations. I know what to look for. I know how to fit in, and just kind of going, okay, all right, let's see what's going on here. And I can speak the language. I can do whatever. But I remember that day specifically coming for the message that I thought I might receive. What ended up happening was I felt so welcomed by you guys. I was invited to come get some snacks in the fellowship hall after the sermon was over, and I just remember feeling so relaxed. I remember feeling so like I was home. When I was coming back from Arizona, I posted something on Facebook about me moving back to Oregon. And that's where I started getting messages from pastors and worship leaders in this area saying, man, we could use a guitar player. Oh, we'd love you to play with us. And can you play guitar for us here? And those emails started coming in. But none of those emails ever said anything about, we'd love to have you at our church. It was about what I could do for them. My idea was to be somewhere where I could feel a part of the community, where I could be a part of the life of that local congregation, and through relationship to watch those things develop. I was more than willing to give of time and talents and abilities and energies and all of that. But I wanted it to be about relationship first. And so to my surprise, I got the message that I came for. And we still have that message. I've been growing in that message. But I've also been growing in the community here, in the family here, and investing time and energy, just as you guys have all put into me. So I'm excited about the residency program. It's going to be, as Tim said, 2 years. And I'm really looking forward to being a part in an even greater degree than I've been before, and to see what the possibilities are for this congregation, to see how we can welcome new people that come in the door, how we can retain those visitors, how maybe things that we can reach out in the community and do. Maybe there's things that's on your heart that you want to do, maybe things you want to see, and I would welcome anybody to contact me to let me know, because we're all in this together. It's not about me doing a job. It's not about me kind of taking over some things here. But I want to be a part, and I want to gather as many people as I can with that, to partner with you guys. And I'm excited about the opportunities. I'm excited about the future. Again, as Tim shared, this does have a goal in mind. This is about becoming a senior pastor. I never thought that my journey would take so many turns and detours and different things. But I now see the hand of God through every one of those, even the tough times, even the tough things that happened to me. And I'm just glad to be with you guys on this journey together. So thank you.